I haven't seen any victims. His family's here, so I'll be
Jackson. She has two tragedies.
On April 20th, 2025, what should have been a peaceful Easter Sunday in Birmingham, Alabama, turned into a nightmare no one could have imagined. Mickese James Bostic, a 27-year-old father, a juvenile detention officer, and a man known for dedicating his life to steering young people away from violence, became the victim of the very brutality he spent years trying to prevent. But this wasn't the work of a stranger. It wasn't a random act of street violence. In a shocking twist that stunned the entire community, the person accused of ending his life was none other than his longtime girlfriend, the mother of his children, Shatice Jackson. The night had begun as a celebration, a family gathering filled with food, laughter, and birthday cake for one of their kids. Yet behind the smiles, old wounds lingered, tensions simmered, and what started as a joyous occasion would soon spiral into chaos and bloodshed. By the time the sun had set, those closest to Mickese watched in horror as the woman he once loved allegedly ran him down in the family's driveway, crushing him to death in front of his children. The question that gripped the city was, what happened inside that house? What triggered such deadly rage on a day meant to honor life and family? This was more than just a case of domestic violence. This was a story of love corroded by betrayal, of passion turned to fury, and of how quickly the line between devotion and destruction can blur, with fatal consequences. Before we continue, I'd like to say thank you for joining us today. If this is your first time here, welcome. We break down real stories that shake communities and uncover the truths behind the headlines. Please take a moment to like and share this video. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you never miss an update on the cases that matter. To truly understand what happened on that Easter Sunday, we need to step back before the headlines, before the flashing lights and the police tape, before the heartbreak made national news. We need to meet Mickese James Bostic, the man behind the tragedy.
Bitch, clock it. Bitch, clock that T. Bitch, I always better start clocking that T, bitch.
Mickese was Birmingham through and through. Born and raised on the tough streets of the city's east side, he understood struggle from the inside out. His childhood wasn't easy. Raised by a single mother who worked long hours just to keep the lights on, Mickese learned early what it meant to survive in a world that didn't hand out second chances. But instead of letting the streets swallow him, Mickese fought to rise above them. His teachers called him stubborn. His friends called him loyal. To the people who really knew him, he was the one who always carried the weight for everyone else. The friend who'd give you his last dollar. The guy who stayed behind to clean up after the party. The son who never forgot to check on his mama. That sense of responsibility led him into a career most men his age would run from. For 8 years, Mickese served as a juvenile detention officer in Jefferson County. Every day, he stood face to face with the very kids the world had written off. And he fought like hell to show them another way. He told them the streets weren't the answer. That violence wasn't the only language they had to speak. But what no one knew was that Mickese, the man who preached peace, was living his own quiet war behind closed doors. A war that had been brewing for years. Her name was Shatice Jackson.
Yes! That is it!
That is funny!
That is it!
Do it again! What are these kids?
They met young, when love is blind and the future still looks like forever. It wasn't long before they had children together. 2 beautiful kids who became the center of their world, even as their love began to fracture. The breakup wasn't clean. It never is when children are involved. The two remained tethered by more than shared bloodlines. They were bound by obligation, history, unfinished business, and wounds that never fully healed. Friends would later say that their relationship was complicated at best, toxic at worst. They tried to move on, tried to co-parent, but old arguments would resurface. Bitterness would seep back in, and the fine line between love and hate, well, it grew thinner by the day. There were whispers of fights behind closed doors, accusations, arguments that turned from words into shouting matches, played out in front of family and friends who would later wonder if they should have seen the signs sooner. But Mickese, he kept smiling, kept showing up to work, kept telling the kids in his care to choose peace, to break the cycle. What he may never have realized was that he was caught in that same cycle himself. A cycle of love turned resentment, of promises broken, of two people trapped in a story that neither of them knew how to rewrite. And on that Easter Sunday, all those years of unresolved tension would explode. In the driveway of the very home where they once dreamed of raising a family, their love story ended in violence. But before we get to that final moment, you need to understand the boiling point, the subtle cracks in their relationship that would become fault lines. The nights spent smiling through the pain, the friends who saw a man carrying more than he let on. Because this isn't just a story about what happened. It's a story about everything that led up to it. But here's the question I want to ask you. When love turns toxic, when the lines between passion and pain blur, how do you know when it's gone too far? Could this tragedy have been prevented? Could someone, anyone, have stepped in before it was too late? Have you ever seen a situation where love became a ticking time bomb? Tell me what you think in the comments. As the afternoon sun cast a warm glow on Birmingham, Alabama, the house was alive with the sounds of laughter. It was Easter Sunday, a day for family, for celebration, and for coming together. The children ran through the yard, their laughter echoing in the background as balloons swayed gently in the breeze. The smell of food filled the air, and the rhythmic sound of music floated from the kitchen, creating the illusion of a perfect family gathering. It was supposed to be a time of joy, a time of togetherness. But beneath the surface, something was beginning to shift. For Mickese Bostic, this day should have been another milestone in the book of family memories. He had planned to celebrate not only Easter, but also a birthday. But the tensions that had simmered quietly in his relationship with Shatice Jackson were beginning to bubble to the surface. Small arguments had been escalating throughout the day, snaps and sharp words exchanged under the guise of festivity. At first, it seemed harmless, just the ordinary disagreements that can occur when so many people are packed into one house. But as the evening wore on, things began to shift. Shatice, who had always held her ground in their tumultuous relationship, seemed on edge. Family members later recalled how, over the course of the day, she grew more irritated, her mood becoming increasingly volatile. It wasn't just a disagreement over who would sit where at the table or whose turn it was to serve the food. It was something deeper, a growing sense of provocation that, for reasons only she truly knew, seemed to consume her. The tension in the air was thick, and those who had gathered to enjoy the day began to notice the cracks forming. According to family witnesses, what started as mild irritation quickly escalated. The argument between Mickese and Shatice wasn't the loud, explosive kind that could easily be ignored. No, it was a quiet, intense exchange, words sharp enough to leave wounds but not loud enough to pierce the calm of the gathering. One observer later described it as a slow boil, the kind of argument that no one quite knows how to stop until it reaches its breaking point. The more the day dragged on, the more the people around them started to notice that the smiles weren't quite as genuine, the laughter not as carefree. Jackson had been feeling provoked for a while, a simmering resentment growing inside her. Some believed it was triggered by the stress of raising their children together. Others suggested it was a culmination of years of unresolved tension between the two. Whatever the reason, it was clear that the situation was becoming dangerous. And then came the moment that no one could have predicted. At some point, Shatice left the house. What transpired during those moments outside is still a point of mystery. What we know for sure is that when she returned, everything had changed. Shatice walked back into that house with more than just her temper. She was armed, and her anger had reached its boiling point. What was a family gathering just hours before had now turned into something dark and deadly. It was in these moments that the party shifted from one of celebration to one of fear. Let's pause for a second. Could this have been prevented? Or was it already too late? Was this tragedy written in the stars? Or could someone have stepped in to break the pattern before the situation reached its breaking point? Shatice Jackson, clearly overwhelmed by emotions she could no longer contain, stepped out into the yard, away from the chaos of the party. Mickese, likely unaware of just how far the argument had pushed her, was still inside, trying to keep the peace. But it was too late for peace. Too late for the light-hearted celebration that had once filled the house. Outside, the world seemed to slow as Shatice's mind raced with unresolved feelings and mounting anger. She wasn't simply walking away from an argument. She was stepping into a dark place, one that would soon lead to violence. What transpired during those moments of solitude, those final minutes before everything shattered, remains a mystery. Only Shatice truly knows. But when she re-entered that house, something had changed. Shatice returned, not just with a hard edge to her demeanor, but with something far more dangerous. She had a gun. The family inside was unaware of what had transpired, unaware of the weapon that now hung at her side. But it didn't take long for the reality to sink in. Without warning, the confrontation escalated further. Shatice fired shots inside the house. Loud, violent cracks that echoed through the walls, sending every person in the house scrambling for cover. The fear was immediate. Everyone knew that this wasn't just another argument now. This was something much darker. Miraculously, no one inside the house was hit, but the terror was palpable. The sound of the gunshots, the flash of movement, the blur of bodies ducking for safety, was more than enough to shake everyone to their core. But the chaos didn't end there. After the shots, Shatice's anger was far from spent. She stormed back outside, her footsteps heavy and determined. Mickese, standing near the door, likely still processing what had just happened, could only watch as Shatice got into her car. The sense of dread that had already settled over the scene intensified. Family members, now frozen in fear and disbelief, rushed to the front yard. They could only shout, beg, plead for Shatice to stop, to think about the children, to reconsider. But their voices were drowned out by the sound of the engine revving. The car's tires spun, and with one last, defiant surge of power, Shatice accelerated. The horror that followed unfolded in seconds. Mickese had no time to react. The car, driven by someone he had once loved, slammed into him, sending him tumbling forward. His body hit the ground with a sickening thud, and in an instant, he was trapped. Witnesses later described the scene as a nightmare come to life. Mickese was pinned between the moving car and the house. The screams of family members echoed in the street, and the horrified onlookers could do nothing but watch as the tragic reality unfolded before their eyes. Mickese, a man who had always been a protector, now lay helpless in a place he thought was safe, the very house that should have been a sanctuary for his family. As Mickese struggled, gasping for air, Shatice sped off, leaving behind the wreckage she had created. The family, still in shock, scrambled to call 911. The voices on the other end of the line trembled with fear as they tried to explain the unthinkable. A father, a man they loved, now lying in the street, crushed and trapped. The urgency in their voices told a story all its own, one of desperation, disbelief, and sorrow. As the minutes passed, the air became thick with the realization that the life of a father, a partner, was hanging in the balance. And as the sirens grew louder in the distance, it was clear that the situation had spiraled beyond anyone's control. The sound of the police cars, the fire trucks, coming to the scene with lights flashing, served as a bitter reminder of how quickly everything had gone from celebration to catastrophe. When the police arrived, they were met with a scene of utter chaos. The smell of burnt rubber hung in the air, the ground soaked with the remnants of what had just happened. People were standing in shock, unable to process the tragedy that had unfolded in front of them. Some were crying, others frozen in disbelief, and yet there were no answers to be found, just the stillness of a night that would forever be marked by its violence. Mickese Bostic, the loving father, the protector, was now fighting for his life. But for those who had witnessed the moments leading up to this tragedy, the questions were already forming. How did it come to this? How did a celebration, a birthday party, end in such horror? And what would happen next? The answers, it seemed, were only just beginning to unfold. In the days following the incident, Shatice Jackson was apprehended and charged with capital murder. The severity of the charge was not just due to the act itself, but also because a child had been present during the fatal event. This detail added a layer of complexity to the case, highlighting the recklessness and danger of the situation. The legal community and the public alike were taken aback by the gravity of the charges, as it underscored the profound consequences of the actions that led to Mickese Bostic's death. As the case progressed to court, the emotional toll on all involved was palpable. Family members of both Mickese and Shatice attended the proceedings, their faces etched with sorrow and disbelief. The courtroom became a stage for raw emotion, as testimonies revealed the depth of the relationships and the pain of the loss. The defense and prosecution presented their arguments, but the underlying tragedy of a life lost and a family torn apart resonated more powerfully than any legal argument could convey. The legal proceedings delved into the specifics of the incident, with the prosecution emphasizing the presence of a child during the act. This detail was pivotal in the case, as it not only highlighted the danger posed by Shatice's actions, but also brought to light the broader implications of her behavior. The defense, on the other hand, sought to provide context, suggesting that the events leading up to the incident were complex and multifaceted. However, the presence of the child and the nature of the crime weighed heavily in the legal considerations. Perhaps the most heartbreaking aspect of this tragedy was the impact on the children. Now left without both parents, they faced an uncertain future. The community rallied around them, offering support and resources to help them navigate the challenging path ahead. However, no amount of assistance could erase the emotional scars left by the events. The absence of their father, a man who had been a pillar of strength and guidance, left an irreplaceable void in their lives. Beyond the immediate family, the broader community of Birmingham mourned the loss of Mickese Bostic. Known for his work with troubled youth and his dedication to making a positive impact, Mickese had been a figure of hope and inspiration. His death left a community grappling with the loss of a mentor, a friend, and a symbol of resilience. Vigils were held in his honor, and stories of his kindness and commitment to others circulated, painting a picture of a man who had devoted his life to helping those in need. The community's grief was not just for the individual lost, but also for the ideals and hope he represented. As the legal proceedings continued and the family sought to heal, the shadows of that night loomed large. The questions of what led to such a devastating outcome and how to prevent similar tragedies in the future remained unanswered. The story of Mickese Bostic and Shatice Jackson was a stark reminder of the complexities of relationships and the profound consequences of actions taken in moments of intense emotion. As we come to the end of this heartbreaking story, it's important to take a moment to reflect on the larger message. This wasn't a random act of violence. It was a slow, silent descent, the kind that happens behind closed doors until it's too late. Mickese Bostic's tragic death was not an isolated incident, but rather a culmination of a series of events that were building up, unnoticed by those around him until they spiraled out of control. It's easy to look at the final act of violence and think it was sudden, unexpected, but the truth is, for those who knew the couple well, there were signs. There were moments, small arguments that festered, pressures that built. This wasn't the first time an argument had turned heated, nor was it the first time Mickese tried to defuse a volatile situation. But this time, it escalated in ways no one could have predicted. Domestic violence doesn't always look like what we expect. It doesn't always involve obvious bruises or dramatic confrontations. Sometimes it's subtle, hidden beneath the surface, behind closed doors, wrapped in words and actions that may seem minor to the outside world, but are deeply damaging to the person enduring them. Toxic cycles are difficult to break, especially when they're concealed in the everyday moments of life. An argument, a misunderstanding, a frustrated exchange. Over time, these cycles build, twisting into something far more dangerous. What started as a single argument at a birthday party became the tragic end of a life. The signs were there, but they went unnoticed. It's crucial that we understand the importance of early intervention. Domestic violence often doesn't escalate overnight. It's a progression, and if we can recognize the warning signs early, if we can encourage those in toxic relationships to seek help before it gets worse, maybe, just maybe, lives like Mickese could be saved. If you or someone you know is in an abusive relationship, don't wait until it's too late. Speak up, reach out, and get help. Sometimes the hardest thing is to ask for help, but it is the most important thing you can do. If you're watching this and something about this story resonates with you, please share this video. Share it to spread awareness, to start conversations, and to remind people that we all have a part to play in recognizing the signs of domestic violence and ending the cycle. As one of Mickese's family members reflected, he tried to save others, but no one saved him. This tragic loss is a painful reminder that sometimes the most selfless people, the ones who dedicate their lives to helping others, are the ones who need saving the most. Let's honor Mickese's memory by looking out for one another, by breaking the silence, and by ensuring that tragedies like this don't happen again.